As you're looking through the internet, seeing everyone else catching fish, it's easy to ask, what baits are they using? What lakes are they at? And what secrets do they have? The real secret to fishing is understanding the fish, becoming confident in tactics, and knowing where to find them. On this episode of Secrets to Fishing, Peter breaks down how he picked out one of his favorite early ice walleye locations. Next, he covers how a minnow's action is changed when different hooking techniques are used and how it affects the fish you are targeting. Finally, Peter sits down with Geo Speaks and North Dakota FCA Outdoors Director Geremy Olson as they discuss the elements on raising kids in the outdoors. This episode is presented by ShopMissouriSecrets.com and North Country Marine and Motorsports. Learning to find your favorite early ice spot is brought to you by ShopMissouriSecrets.com.
We're finally out on first ice, and I'm at one of my favorite first ice locations for perch and walleye. I'm going to tell you why I like this spot. Not only that, I'm going to help you learn how you can pick out one of these spots for yourself. So let's drill a couple holes and get into it. The first thing I'm going to do is drill a couple test holes just to make sure the ice is thick enough for me. And next, I'm going to drill 2 sets of 16 holes, and I'm going to tell you why. The spot we're at tonight is a saddle that's located between the mainland and an island. The way I drill the holes is between 1 foot of water on one side all the way to 1 foot of water on the other side. The water is about 9 feet deep right in the middle here, so there's plenty of water to cover and plenty of places to fish. When I'm drilling holes, I place them about 4 feet apart from each other, and then for every person that's on the ice, I drill another line of holes. Okay, we're at the other side now. Now what I'm going to do is just move over 10 feet, drill another set. Well, now that I got the 32 holes drilled, I'm going to show you the tactics that I use to catch fish and, more importantly, be ready when they come. So now that all of my holes are drilled, I'm going to start things off with 4 tip-ups. And the way I place my tip-ups is to zigzag them through the spread of holes. One thing I really like about the spot is it's not super deep. You know, a lot of guys this time of year, they're fishing super deep, you know, thinking that the fish are way out deep in the middle of the lake. In reality, they're up shallower than you realize. You know, the deepest spot on this little saddle is 9 feet. And as the fish come in throughout the day, and especially like now the evening, they're going to move up through the middle here and then start pushing bait shallow, where we're going to have our tip-ups and slip bobbers ready. So when we see a bobber go down, we know that they're going to be moving to 2 feet of water. So the one thing you're probably noticing is I've got different color tip-ups. Now I have 2 pink tip-ups and 2 orange tip-ups, and everything on them as far as the rig and bait are the same. But what I do is when I place these is the orange tip-ups are going to be about 1 foot off the bottom, and my pink tip-ups I'll put about 6 inches off the bottom. And with the color-coded tip-ups, it allows me to be much more quick and efficient when I need to change my presentations. They're also easier to keep track of, so you know you didn't forget one on the ice. And a little tip with tip-ups is you'll notice that on all tip-ups, they've got the little spool has a big notch and a little notch. Now the thing to remember is with these early ice locations is sometimes the fish can be really picky and barely grab your bait. So I put the flag pole on the little notch. So what that'll do is it will let the fish grab the bait easier and have less resistance to pull against. And I can detect even the slightest little bites. So now that we've got our tip ups in the water, what I'm going to do is place slip bobber rods on either side of the saddle on the drop off. So tonight when the fish start moving shallow, these bobber rods will allow me to get my bait back in the water quickly so I don't waste any time between fish catches. So now that we have our tip ups and slip bobbers in the water, it's time to do some hole hopping. And what I'm going to do is just move between hole and hole throughout our spread. And I'm going to start things off with some smaller perch jigs and baits because they like to move around more and you have a better chance of catching them during this nice daylight. And then the closer to dark we get, I'm going to start switching over to my bigger walleye jigs like rattling spoons and especially glow in the dark. So let's take a look at the importance of timing when you're on early ice. So over here during the day, the fish are hanging out in the main body of water. And as the day goes on, they're funneling through the saddle, following the food to where they want to eat them at night. And when they're coming through this spot, they have to go by one of 3 different types of baits. So every night we start out with the same 3 tactics, and then we have enough gear to switch over to whatever is working the best that night. Because remember, in order to catch fish, you got to listen to them and figure out what they want. What's important to remember about fishing this time of year is to know where and when to be at a particular spot. Over the years, in this specific location, we know the best time to be out here is an hour before and an hour after sunset. And the one big mistake a lot of people make is leaving a spot too early or getting there too late. There you go. Oh, he's still on there. Oh yeah, there we go. So make sure you pick the right spot and the right time. So when you're out on early ice, you'll catch a lot of fish and have a lot of fun.
This week's Simple Trick is brought to you by American Legion Victor B. Wallen Post 12.
Do you ever have the problem where you're reeling up your tip up, but the line doesn't move? Well, the solution is as simple as a roll of electrical tape. All you gotta do is put 2 layers of electrical tape around the knot before you spool your tip up. This will prevent the line from slipping around the spool. And now, it's time for me to go outfish my brothers.
This underwater learning experience is brought to you by Sakakawea State University. Stay in schools.
That's what we're looking for here. You know, a lot of people think that when you go out on the ice and you put a jig and a minnow down or a jig and a bobber down, that it's just there sitting there doing nothing. Well, we're going to go back to the shop and take a look at what exactly happens when you put a minnow down under the ice. So now that we're here back at the office, let's take a look at a handful of ways that we like to rig our minnows. Starting off is a classic nose hooked minnow with the jig. Now you can jig it aggressively to bring the fish in, but when you stop the jig, the minnow has a very subtle action because it has to push the jig around, and that will help trigger the bite. Now taking away the jig and using just a large plain hook, the minnow is going to get more movement and action, but again, because it has to push a big hook around, you're limiting its distance it can swim from the center of the hole. The next action we're going to look at is hooking your minnow from the dorsal fin backwards right under the skin. When you hook your minnow this way, the minnow will tend to swim toward the bottom and away from the center of the hole, only being limited by the length of the leader. Now by simply changing direction and pointing the hook forward, the minnow will tend to swim up from the bottom and away from the center of the hole, again, only being limited by the length of the leader. Now most bites occur when the fish thinks that the bait is either getting away or when the minnow is falling back to center after it gives up. As a side note, this is why we love to use ball bearing swivels on our tip ups and rattle reels, because when the minnow is spinning in a circle when it's falling back, you're not going to get bit. Now whether it's a jig or a hook, most people tend to think that tail hooking a minnow gives it the best action, but what's really happening is the minnow is just trying to swim straight down. Again, whether you're using a jig or a hook, when you tail hook two minnows like this, the minnows will swim apart from each other and end up not moving at all from the center of the hole, creating a lot of action in a single spot. Now something we found pretty interesting with jigs and minnows is that jigs will tend to have the opposite effect that a hook does on a minnow's action. So here, a dorsal fin forward hooked minnow with a jig, the minnow will tend to swim down and away from the hole instead of up and away. Now what you'll tend to find is that the fish will strike when the minnow starts to move or while it's falling back to the center. It's a little bit better one there. So the next time you're on the ice, pay attention to how exactly you hook your minnows and catch more fish.
Everybody's been asking what Peter's going to do now that he's done with high school. Well, let me tell you about Sakakawea State University, the official educational choice of Secrets to Fishing TV.
How old do you have to be to go to Sakakawea State University?
Well, Cohen, I started when I was 5, and at Sakakawea State University, a lot of people have learned what it takes to stay in schools.
I learned patience and to always stay humble at Sakakawea State University.
Wait, did somebody say Sakakawea State University? Most important thing, stay in schools.
I've earned money because I learned to stay in schools.
We wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't stayed in school.
What do I have to do to stay in schools?
All you gotta do is go to Sakakawea State University Facebook page and learn all sorts of fish facts and then go fishing.
Hi, Peter. Hey, I wish I went to Sakakawea State University.
I wish my kid would have picked Sakakawea State University.
Sakakawea State University, the official Fish Facts Facebook page and clothing line of Secrets to Fishing TV.
I invented Sakakawea State University.
This secret is brought to you by Brewer Agri Outdoors.
A lot of people ask us, how long do glow-in-the-dark lures glow? And the answer is on how well you charge them. One of the best ways to get a good charge on your glow-in-the-dark lures is to leave them out in the sunlight for at least 1 to 2 hours. The next best way is to use a UV light source like this flashlight. LEDs will get the job done, and fluorescence and incandescent sources don't seem to do the trick. So make sure you get a good charge on your jigs and catch more fish.
Raising an Angler is brought to you by geospeaks.live.
So growing up, everyone's been told to go take a kid fishing, but nobody has ever been taught how to take a kid fishing. So today we're here with my dad, and we're going to go through some of the simple beginning steps on taking a kid fishing in the outdoors. So Dad, growing up, we didn't have a whole lot of rules when you took us outside. Why is that, and why is that so important?
Well, there's a big difference between rules and principles, and when you're learning how to grow up in the outdoors, you need to learn a lot of principles, because those principles are what helps you make wise decisions. Rules are things that you just don't do. And pretty much the only rule that you guys had when we were taking you out hunting and fishing growing up was never get cold, never get hungry. And that's a hard and fast rule when you're first taking a kid out fishing or hunting.
You know, growing up, it's very important, you know, looking back on it, making sure you have something with so you can keep focused on the task at hand.
Well, and what's important about that rule, especially when you're taking new anglers out, the thing that parents or whoever's taking that young angler out, or even a first-time angler or somebody that's out hunting, is to understand their limitations. Never get cold, never get hungry is important, because we don't want to have somebody out there getting cold, because we all know that when we're warm, we're happy. When we're cold, we're frustrated and stuff. And that's where some of those bad horror stories come from, is when kids are out hunting and fishing for the first time and they got cold, they don't want to ever go back and do it again.
Yeah, because it's always important, if you want to have someone learn and understand something, keeping them engaged is the best way to keep them going further and further into the future.
Correct. And so that's pretty much, that's the reason we had that one rule: never get cold, never get hungry. Now what's interesting about that rule is that's a rule that, like you just mentioned, we kind of do away with the older you get, because once somebody's engaged and really wants to be part of the outdoors, that's when you have to start stretching yourself and your kids. And so there's days where we stayed out longer, and that's to help with self-confidence. And like you're a great example, there was days we had to drag you off the ice, no matter how cold or hungry you were, because you were so engaged in fishing that you didn't care about being cold or hungry.
So you just mentioned something about limitations and capabilities. Expand on that.
So every person has capabilities and limitations. Attention span is a huge one for kids. Some kids have an attention span that's really long when it comes to the outdoors, and some have a really short attention span when it comes to the outdoors. Some kids can handle the cold, some kids can't. Some kids can handle holding a spinning rod at an early age. A great example is all 4 of you kids learned how to use a spinning rod and reel at the in the same amount of time, but all at different ages, because your capabilities at that age were different. So as parents or people taking new anglers in the outdoors, we need to understand those capabilities and limitations. We got to make sure that we never ask a kid to do something that's a limitation for them, but expand on their capabilities.
You know, I've seen people trying to get their kids for the first time drilling holes with the auger, and they're, you know, spinning in a circle and not doing too well. So
yeah, and that never goes well. So you know, the saddest thing for me is watching when a kid goes out on their first ice fishing trip or their first hunting trip, and they come back and they don't ever want to do it again because of the bad experience. Well, asking somebody to do something that's a limitation for them is one of those big hallmark things that makes that a bad experience. So, but when you allow a kid to do something that's part of their capabilities and praise them for that, then that's those things that help reinforce how much fun that was in the outdoors.
Yeah, being able to start off simple and build your way up and achieve that next goal, even if it's as simple as hooking a minnow in a different way.
Yeah, it's always important. Never take a kid out in the outdoors and just have them be there. Give them jobs to do, make them part of the experience. That's because when we're raising kids in the outdoors, part of that is raising kids that are self-sufficient. So the earlier you give them jobs, and then once they accomplish one job well, then that's when you give them the next job. So once they're skimming holes and they're not dropping skimmers down the hole, then that's when you help them start setting up slip bobber rods or tip ups or something like that. I think one of the keys to taking kids in the outdoors is having a goal. Yeah. And the goal that we set out every time we took you guys out, and what we teach parents, is to make sure that every time you take your kids out, you have a positive outdoor experience. That's not saying it was really fun. That's not saying it wasn't hard at sometimes, but that it was a positive experience. And one of the biggest keys to that is knowing when to go home.
So, it's important to have a kid, not only be engaged, but be excited to go the next time and not be upset. So how do you know when that key time is to either go or go home?
What's important about this is you have to understand your kids or the kid you're taking fishing, because the answer to that question is really simple and really complicated at the same time, and that is before they ask to leave. If a kid asks to leave, you've been there too long. Yep. Okay. And what's the way I like to explain it is, I would love to take a kid off the ice, out of that outdoor experience, and have them be upset that they're still not there, because that gets them wanting to go back. But if a kid asks to go, that means they probably got cold, they're no longer having fun. It means they've had too much already. Yep. And 9 times out of 10, when a kid asks to leave, that means that you've waited too long, and now that's going to be a negative experience in that kid's mind. A great example of this is the Christmas fishing trips with you and your cousins. How long were those trips?
They weren't very long. I think I can recall one time, we were only out on the ice for an hour.
And if it's a 1-hour trip, that's okay. It's all about having fun out there. So if you take a group of anglers out, you go for an hour and you come back, that's worth it, because in the long run. As adults, what we're guilty of when we take kids fishing is we come up with these grand plans, and it's going to be the epic fishing day, and we need to call the taxidermist on Monday because we went fishing on Saturday, and it's all going to be awesome and the coolest thing ever, and we get the kids all psyched up about going fishing, and then it's a snow day, and now that's a negative outdoor experience. Because we all know that weather always does what you want it to.
Exactly.
So I always have a backup plan. Don't make a big deal out of it. Make a big deal about the experience that you get to have with those kids that day. And don't make it be a super long trip. Make it be something that's important to those kids at that time.
Yeah, having a backup plan, and more importantly, using your resources. You mentioned that when we found this lake we took all of our cousins to go fish, we called the fisheries biologist. And that's a huge piece of information that a lot of people don't realize that they could utilize to be successful outside.
I think when you're taking kids fishing, don't ever be afraid to ask for help. And if there's an angler that doesn't give you help to take kids fishing, they're not a really good angler. Game and Fish will help. A lot of sportsmen's groups will help. The one thing I will say is be honest. If you're going to take kids fishing, tell people, hey, I'm taking some kids fishing. What's the best place to do? Do not say I'm taking kids fishing and then go fish out a spot with you and your buddies. That's just bad karma.
So with all of this wrapped up, it's important to make sure that you understand your angler or first-time outdoorsman, know what they're capable of doing and what their limitations are, and that's the basics to taking a kid fishing.
Yep, and if you do that, you might end up having a kid running a tackle company and running a TV show. So I'd be careful.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.
This week's Leaving Ripples is brought to you by MPR Models.
You may hope that what you're hearing from the people around you is true and that it'll help you get through life. But when you take the time to find and rely on the truth, you're going to know that you're going down the right path. But what's cool is that when you rely on the truth, you're going to leave ripples you may never see.
Thank you to these great partners for making Secrets to Fishing possible.